Welcome to this next episode of Living Life Being Human, and I've got two amazing guests with me. That one knows my innermost secrets because Steffi was my therapist for quite a few years, and the other, her other half, Mr. Bob Cooke, was my trainer. He founded the Manchester Institute of Psychotherapy, or MIP as it's affectionately known, in Manchester, where I did my training. So welcome.
Thank you.
To my podcast.
Thank you.
It's not that serious. You can talk freely about anything, but we thought we've just had a quick discussion and we thought we would talk a little bit about catastrophizing, which I think is quite apt with the year that we've had.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
And I notice it quite a lot because we've been in a roller coaster of fear, because what's happened to us is something that is completely out of our control.
Yeah.
There has been no way of knowing how that was going to end or when it's going to stop. So even if it's unconscious, all of us have got much, much higher levels of cortisol, the fight or flight hormone, going on.
Yeah.
And what we've been robbed of is that sense of normality, the sense of it will come to an end. So we still have that quite high levels of cortisol going on every now and again. When we hear in the news about India, we hear in the news about other viruses that are happening. Even though we know we've all been vaccinated, there's always that element of doubt that goes, uh-oh, and switches on the cortisol.
Yeah. And I think I talk quite a bit with my clients about black and white thinking as well as catastrophizing. It's like everything's wonderful or everything's horrendous.
Yeah.
And I keep saying there's a grey bit in the middle. Yeah. It's not one way or the other. And I think it's the same with catastrophizing, really. That, trying to predict the future often doesn't end well in our head.
Absolutely. And it's about the rationale of the here and now. And we very often lose sense of the rationale when the unrational, the irrational,
yeah,
and the things that are really worrying us and scaring us don't appear to be ending, or there seems to be no end to it.
Yeah.
So we lose that sense of rationale. And in TA terms, we call that being grounded in the here and now. Yeah. So when our fight and flight kicks in, which is, the part of our brain, the first part of our brain that gets developed and that protects us, it kind of takes over and stops us from thinking and stops us from working things out from the rational place. And then we catastrophize and get stuck.
Yeah. And it becomes habitual as well. When I talk quite a bit about, and I hold my hand up, I do this, is make stories up. Do you know what I mean? Something will happen and then I make a story up around it. I can remember the first time when I had to wear a mask going shopping. I worked myself up into a frenzy. I'm not going to be able to breathe. I'm not going to be able to do this. And literally on the way into Tesco's, I ended up laughing because just the thought of it, and I could feel my breathing going faster. I'd made up this whole story just around putting a mask on and going into Tesco's.
Yeah. And of course, what we haven't switched in is our rational brain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's gone out the window.
Yeah.
And stopped us from thinking, hold on a minute. What is the reality of this?
Yeah.
What's really happening with me right now? Do I really need to be that anxious about a mask? Everyone's wearing them.
Yeah.
Someone's dropped dead in front of me. So it's those kinds of reality checking things that we lose sight of.
Yeah. See, when you started talking then, Steph, I just went back to 5 years ago when you used to be my therapist. Your tone, all of a sudden, I just went, It's like, so I can imagine if you've got clients that do come that catastrophize, you're a very calming influence. I think me and Bob have touched on this in some of the things that we've been speaking about lately, the therapeutic relationship and how important that is.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think so. Because what the therapist role, first of all, the most important role is to create a safe, protective environment. And that can only happen if you're really connected with your client and if they feel like you really get them.
Yeah.
Then the work can be done. Then the relationship can develop. What do you think, Bob, in this?
Yeah, but I can talk a lot about that. I'd like to backtrack slightly about catastrophization and look at it from a developmental psychological position. You're right, we've got the pandemic and all the triggers of that in 2019, 2021, and people catastrophize for years. So I started seeing clients in 1985. Catastrophization, people catastrophized there, and that led to anxiety, that led to many other things. So if we look back to what drives the catastrophization at a deeper level, I think it's about the desire to keep a person, the desire to keep yourself safe.
Yeah.
In other words, if I catastrophize, then I can control the future, I can work it all out, I can cover all bases so that I will be safe.
So it's a bit like not treading on the cracks.
Yeah. And wouldn't that be wonderful if it worked out that way, Bob? If we could think our way out of it.
Yeah, but that's what I said earlier on, a developmental psychological position, because if we go back through the developmental ages to young ways of thinking, so you're a child psychotherapist, Steph, so
it's
yourself.
It's about having had that good enough parent who's taught you how to self-soothe.
Yeah.
So if you think about cortisol, is a really good way of talking about it, really. And Sue Gerhardt talks about that in her book.
Who's Sue Gerhardt?
She's an author, and she's written a book called Why Love Really Matters.
I've got that book.
Yeah, and she talks about, when we're born, we release the different hormones, and our mothers release hormones like oxytocin, which is the calming, loving, connecting hormone. And children also release hormones during the day. So babies, those of you who are watching and have had babies, know that babies have a crotchety time, a time when they're irritable and not very easily soothed.
Yeah.
And what she talks about is the physiological aspect of development involves releasing of hormones at certain times. So usually a couple of times during the 24 hours in your life, you release more cortisol. And it's usually when your baby is crotchety, they've released cortisol. And what she talks about is it's the connectedness and the attention and the love and the way the mother responds teaches the baby how to self-soothe. So what do we do when our babies cry? We pick them up and we
nurse them,
tickle them. Yeah. So I remember many, many days at the nights and Bob sharing this with me, jiggling Jess to calm her down when she's teething or crotchety. That works. That absolutely works. It soothes cortisol. And it's one of the techniques that they recommend for children. Other theorists have talked about this. Kids who have real low ability to manage their own feelings very often respond to swings and rocking chairs. Even kids 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, they can stick them on a swing or a rocking chair and they'll feel soothed. So what it does is it lowers the cortisol. So getting back to Bob's point about the developmental aspect of this, if you've had that attention or the care or the love that you've needed early on to help you self-soothe, that gets transferred in your brain. So the synapses in your brain that's sending around messages in your brain, and you lay down those memories in that part of your brain that keeps that memory of, this is how I'm meant to soothe. So if I cry, I get attention, and then I know I can get soothed. And later on, the child learns not just to cry, but to do something. So to reach out and to ask for something. And if that gets attended to, they go, oh, I asked for that and it worked, and so on and so forth. So you're building up all those implicit memories in your brain about, this is how I take care of myself.
Yeah, that's right. I had 2 clients today for assessment. I mean, I don't work clinically, as you know, but I do assess people for half an hour to send them to therapists of their choice at the institute. Okay.
Yeah.
So they're two diametrically different cases and very similar. So one comes in and talks about, well, what we're talking about here now, the need for a secure, safe psychotherapist who will provide that nurturing you're talking about, provide that self-object functioning that you're talking about, and providing that self-regulating. That's one per client, so you send off. Then I get somebody else later on in the day, and he was talking about some things. So he was talking about anxiety and self, And I said to him that if I could do one thing now, it would be to advise all the GPs in the country to give everybody with anxiety a gym pass. In other words, send it to the gym, or tell them to go on 4-mile walks every day. And why I'm saying that is because that provides a grounding function.
Yes.
In what you're talking about.
Yes.
They can feel more grounded. You went out for a 5-mile walk today or yesterday. You came back and said, I feel more stable. I feel more grounded. That in itself is a very simple thing a person can do to enable themselves to self-regulate.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a very good point that you've made, Bob, because that's also attending to the cortisol.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's helping to soothe. And Bob's right, you know, it's my sanity. Walking the dogs is one thing I need to do every day.
Yeah.
To just ground me and I feel better. You know, I've got joint pain and things, that helps that.
I think grounding is a term that's sort of bandied around quite a lot. You know, and people say, what does it mean? And for me, it is literally being in nature. Do you know what I mean? Being out without worrying. We were talking about mindfulness earlier on today, Bob, and it's about being mindful, being in the here and now, using our senses, all those things that get us out of our head and back into the present.
Yeah.
If they could bottle it, it would be wonderful.
But it is linked to changing the course. You are right. It is linked to changing the rewiring in your head.
Yeah. When I was talking about this too, I often recommend for people to get out when you get stuck in your head and you're catastrophizing. What it does is keeps you incapacitated.
Yeah.
And stops you from. Well, actually, what you do is you think.
Yeah.
And you overthink, and you can't think to work anything out, because obviously what you need to do is something more behavioral. And I always recommend that for people when they get stuck in their head. Move.
Yeah.
Move that energy. And that helps to rejig the brain as well. If you think about it, like, you know, our brain's a computer, and when we catastrophize, we get stuck or we crash. So what helps to get out of the stuckness and the crashing is to move. And very often I will say to people, even if it's just a walk down to the bottom of the road, do that. And when you're doing that, pay attention to what's happening in your body, and then spread that attention out a bit so that you're noticing things outside of your body. You know, how many red cars have gone by. If you're walking in the park, notice what plants are growing, what birds you can hear singing. So you're gradually actually paying attention more to the here and now, rather than the stuff that's going on in your head. Now, it takes practice. It's not one of those things you can go and go, right, I've sorted it. No. You have to.
That's what I'm passionate about, us teaching kids mindfulness and teaching kids simple little techniques when they're young and in schools that becomes normal to do. Yeah. You know, I think mindfulness is one of those things that will be as normal as jogging at some point, hopefully. Just be mindful.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with what you're saying, and that's the behavioural approach. What you've just talked about, the behavioural approach. I think what I was attempting to say was, yes, that has a very, very important part in all this. However, if you want more deep lying or long-term change, I do believe in the developmental stages that we were talking about early on being reached. And I think that can be reached through online therapy with a therapist who provides that self-object function to help the person deal with the developmental deficits around emotional regulation. And also what I was talking about earlier on in another video to you, Jackie, I talked about the importance of the therapist or the teacher, if you like, it doesn't really matter, who is actually mindfully aware themselves, so they can model down to the teacher, down to the student.
Yeah.
That in another way is self-object functioning.
Yes,
the
absolutely.
teacher becomes the therapist, but in a different guise.
Yeah. And it can be as simple as when a client walks into the room that who has not had the kind of safety or security in a relationship before, who feels uncomfortable and doesn't know how to be. It can be as simple as the therapist checking out, are you okay in that seat? Yeah. The distance between us okay.
And it means so much when somebody says that to you.
Yeah.
In a room and in a therapy situation.
Yeah.
And there's something as well, I'm not sure whether it was one of the courses, because you taught me on the child and adolescent course as well that I did through MIP about reparenting.
Yeah.
And, you know, part of the therapeutic process can be, you know, I don't want to say stepping into the game, but kind of moving into their world to kind of reparent them and then individuate and separate out at some point.
Yeah.
Appropriately, which is really powerful for some people.
Yeah. And I think that happens when you say things like a client's talking about, and I've done this and I've done that and I feel so overwhelmed and I'm not coping, and you say, oh, it's interesting, I'm wondering why you feel like you have to do so many things. Do you want to talk about that? And they begin to talk about it, and you might say, oh, I wonder why you did that. And then they talk about that, and then you say, did you need to do it? And they go, actually, no, I didn't. Kind of just unpicking it, just by unpicking it, because they're so entrenched in their own script, what we call script. Sometimes just picking back those layers and questioning things helps people to realise they can let some things go.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest, Steph, then, as in the service of this, what we're talking about here, what would you suggest you put in the place to a client or people, viewers here? What would you suggest people put in the place of catastrophization?
I don't think it's that simple, Bob.
No, but if you had to make it simple for the viewers.
Oh, okay. Well, I'd think about, first of all, some of the techniques that I tell people, if they are catastrophizing, is to stop and slow their breathing down, first of all. Right, to use what I call the 4-4 method. So to breathe in, count to 4, breathe out, count to 4, stop. Breathe in, count to 4, breathe out, count to 4, stop. Because what that does is slow down the cortisol. First of all, it just slows it down. And then maybe, as I said to you, to do something that is supportive of themselves. So instead of staying stuck, maybe to ask for a hug or go for a coffee or go for a walk, and start to maybe reality check with the person that they're with, to say, I'm really concerned about something and it keeps going over in my head. So it's out of their head. Write it down on paper, take it to therapy. So I have another client who catastrophizes quite a lot, and I always say to her, once you've written it down on paper, what does it look like? What's the issue that you're catastrophizing about? What does it look like?
So would you say then the goal would be relaxed, to feel relaxed, or to? It
is, but also it's to rejig the brain as well. So the other things I sometimes advise people to do is, so I had one client who's taking her exams, and she was really scared of when she was in the exam room that she'd go blank. She's a very clever girl, really clever, but she's scared of failing. And when we worked it back, it was all to do with the expectations her parents had of her at the time, and she didn't want to let them down. So I negotiated with the school. Not every school will do this, to allow her to go into the exam room with a packet of, what were they called? Very, very strong chewing gum. Can't remember the name of it.
Oh, I know, airwaves or something.
Airwaves, that's it.
Blaster,
and,
yeah.
And when you chew on one, it kind of...
Yeah, knocks your socks off.
And she said to me, what that helps me do is focus on just that and nothing else. And then I come back.
Yeah.
And we used that technique before the exams, because she got anxious when she went into big crowds and things, and she just chewed on her airwaves.
Yeah.
And there was a mantra. She said, I can do this, I'm okay. I can do this, I'm okay. And so she used it in her exam. So it kind of rejigged, instead of being that internal catastrophizing sense of,
yeah,
it just rejigged her.
Yeah,
and things like smells are really good as well.
I was just going to say that. Where's my thing? This I use this all the time. I tell people, put some hand cream on or something that smells. Nobody knows you've got it, and you can just put your hand to your face and smell something that just is calming. Yeah.
I've got another client who uses a mouth freshener, which is something I gave to her years ago, and she carried a replacement ever since around with her.
Yeah. Yeah.
You see, I think it's what I was attempting to get to was rejigging and it to get to where, and I think it's about enabling a person to actually be in touch with their emotions and thinking,
at the same time. Yeah, thinking and feeling. Because when you're catastrophizing, you're not feeling. Well, you are, but you're escalating that feeling.
Yeah.
And you can never think to work things out if it's an emotional issue.
Yeah.
Because it just will stay there.
Well, that's it. It's kind of like, because I know you do NLP and all that sort of stuff, but it's kind of like the logical bit just shuts down, it buggers off, and you're just left with all the animal instinct of survival and run like hell or stand and fight.
Yeah.
You've kind of done all the overthinking stuff. But what you said earlier on, Steffi, I 100% agree with it. It takes practice. It's not something you can do once and master it. It's something that you need to practice doing, like you said, chewing on chewing gum and see what works for you, because we are all individual, but there will be something. Yeah,
because we're all different. Some people are kinesthetic. I don't know what the others are. Some people are differently to different things. So you have to work out what's good for you and what works for you. So tasty sometimes works.
Yeah. And the other thing, what you touched on as well, I use that with clients quite a lot. In fact, I probably pee them off quite regular. If we're in the therapy room and I can see them shrinking, they're basically going back into the fetal positions, you know what I mean? They're that stressed. I'll get them to get up and move and sit over the other side of the couch, or we'll swap seats. You sit here and I'll sit there. Because even just sitting in the same position, we kind of replay the same thoughts. Whereas if we get up and move, it just does snap us out of it sometimes.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, because sometimes when we're in that catastrophizing place, we feel very disempowered.
Yeah.
We lose our power. We lose our sense of being able to be in control.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's a good trick, get the client to swap with you and say, right, you're now me.
Yeah, I've done that before now. What would you say if you were me? Swap seats. You sit here and I'll be you and you be me.
And, we talk about that as transference, and very often clients will take that away in their head and think about you when they're in a situation. They'll go, what would Steph say? I know what she'd say.
Yeah. There is that, there's a technical term for it as well. What is it when they take something of yours?
Transitional object.
That's the one. Yeah, I was talking to somebody about that this week, and I was saying, you can have something and take it with you. She needs to have a break from therapy for a while, and she's worried. I'm not going anywhere. She's not hearing that. She's catastrophizing that, something's going to happen and she won't be able to come back to me. So I said, well, if you need, something of me just to feel like I'm still there with you, then that's absolutely fine. We can do it.
And that takes you back to what Bob was saying about it being a developmental issue as well.
Yeah.
Because if you know, kids do have those little security blankets, don't they? Mum's not there.
That's it.
I'm not saying as therapists we're mums, but
No.
we're touching on a very young place with them sometimes with our clients, because that's where the deficit began.
Yeah.
When we get to those core issues, we very often find out that it began at a very young age, and very often it's at that age where you're beginning to become more aware of the world about you and the separation from mum and dad to the outer world sometimes, and then you go back, you go out, you go back, you go out. That's called rapprochement, where you go in and out and in and out, and the mother welcomes the child back and says, "Hi, how have you been? What have you been doing?" And then the child goes off again. And so the transitional object, in a way, it mirrors that experience for the client. So when Bob's talking about this is a developmental catastrophization, has a developmental element to it. It is about you not having something in your head that goes, it's okay, you don't have to catastrophize. This is what you need to do to work it out, or I'm here, or I can support you.
Yeah. And to be fair, a lot of the stuff that we're going through as adults started when we were very young.
Yeah.
99.9% of the stuff is from way back when. Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for both being here. I need to say that Steph was put on the spot because it was meant to be me and Bob, and she was preparing the tea, and Bob said, "Steffi, come and get in here."
See, Jacci, there's no procrastination with me. There's no catastrophization.
So just say it like it is. Get her in here.
No catastrophizing at all. I knew she'd do a wonderful job.
And she did. Takes me back about 4 years. So thank you so much for being here, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Yeah, be a pleasure to.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.